I really didn't understand what was happening, and then he had sexually assaulted me.
I remember waking up the next morning at the hotel that I went to. It was kind of a moment of panic because I'm like, wait, did that seriously just happen?
And so I started to blame myself. Why did I let something like this happen? I felt like nothing after that ever felt the same.
Everybody knows why you're there. It felt like a walk of shame. You have to expose yourself. You're vulnerable. You're getting pictures taken. You're getting swabs done.
What if I needed you to find that person and stop this man? Why wait for me? Why wait for my DNA so long?
The voices you just heard are women who were raped. Beyond that, what they tragically have in common is that their rapists have not yet been brought to justice. Hello, and welcome to The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. It's been nearly a decade since the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, or SAKI, has been put into place, a relatively new grant program that takes aim at the decades-old problem of unprocessed sexual assault kits. Since its founding in 2015, SAKI has handed out nearly $350 million in grant money to 90 local and state agencies across the U.S. But for many rape survivors, the program's promise of justice fell short. Thousands of kits still went untested. Many victims were never told about their results. In many communities, few arrests or convictions ever arrived. Meanwhile, for many cases, the statute of limitations is looming or is already passed. Our guest today is USA Today investigative reporter Tricia Nadolny, who spent a year and a half investigating what really happened with America's rape kit backlog. Tricia, thanks for joining us.
Sure, thanks for having me.
As I mentioned, the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative has been around for almost a decade. The idea was to finally test hundreds of thousands of backlogged rape kits in the hopes that this would lead to more convictions. What did you find in your investigation? Give us the big picture here.
So when federal officials launched the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, they said that this program would help put rapists behind bars and bring answers for survivors who had waited years, or in some cases decades, to find out what happened to their sexual assault kits. But what we found is that there have been really uneven results across the country, and there are really three places where we saw this breakdown. First, there was this promise to finally test these kits, and we saw in some communities they carved out exceptions to testing and have left kits untested for a second time. There also is a promise to investigate these cases and prosecute them. And we found that in some places, police and prosecutors have still just shown a lot of resistance to revisiting these old cases. Police sometimes think that revisiting these cases is like second guessing their decisions that they made on the investigation the first time around. And then the third piece here is bringing answers to victims. And, this piece of it is somewhat tricky when you contact a survivor years after they were raped. That call might be welcome for some people, and for other, it might be a very difficult phone call to receive. But what we found is that in a lot of communities, they have really moved very far away from this concept of bringing answers and apologies to survivors. They've contacted very few, and in some places, only people whose cases they think can be prosecuted. So there are most people whose kits have been tested under this program still have no idea.
How long are victims waiting to hear about their kits and if they've had any matches in police databases? And does this mean that victims are running out of time to press charges if the authorities ever do find a suspect?
So some of these kits have been sitting in police storage for decades. The oldest sexual assault kit found in Kansas, for example, was from 1994. In Iowa, it was from 1992. So unfortunately, in the years that have passed since these cases were reported, in a lot of them, statutes of limitations to bring charges have already passed. But what's important is there is still value in testing all of those kits, because what's been found across the country is when you test all sexual assault kits from reported crimes, even if the statute has passed, these cases link to each other, and you might be able to solve a case that still has the statute of limitations open, even if, another case tied to that same person can't be charged. So that's what's been happening. These kits have been tested, and in some places, when a kit is tested, there is this narrow window that authorities still have to investigate and bring charges, and we've found that those windows sometimes close still without anyone being taken into custody.
Let's pivot to prosecutions now and the goal of keeping rapists accountable for their crimes. How many convictions has this initiative resulted in, and why do you think the numbers stand where they do?
Well, so far, the program has resulted in the testing of about 100,000 rape kits across the country and netted about 1,500 prosecutions. In a lot of places, the programs are ongoing. What's happened, though, is that nearly half of those convictions come from just two places, the prosecutor's offices in Detroit and in Cleveland. So we've seen two programs that are really successful. And in many other places, there has been far less success in terms of investigating and bringing new charges in these cases. And there's a lot of reasons why that has happened, but we have seen that a lot of these cases are just getting only cursory reviews, or when they are being opened, the police are looking into the allegations, but these investigations drag on for years sometimes. At the end of them, they hand the case over to the prosecutors, and the prosecutors still decide to not file charges. So we're really just seeing uneven results across the country, and a couple of places that have had far more success than others in bringing new charges and holding these suspects accountable.
Tricia, it sounds like some cities are really struggling more than others here. Why is that?
Well, you have to kind of start at the beginning of the process. So these places count their backlogs and they start with a number of untested kits. And in some places, they just go ahead and test all of them. And in others, they've decided to only test certain kinds of kits. So, for example, in Iowa, when they counted their backlog across the state, they only ended up testing less than half of what they had. So you're already limiting the pool of cases that then have a chance of moving forward. So, then places test their kits and they have leads coming in, DNA matches coming in, not on every case, but there will be, new information and new DNA evidence coming into the police department, and they start opening up these police files and investigating. And what we see at that point is that a lot of these cases just run into the same problems that they encountered the first time these victims come forward. And, there's issues with what kind of case it is, what kind of suspect it is, what kind of information the police have to work with, and really what that mindset is within the police department and within the prosecutor's office of whether they want to revisit these old cases. And we're just seeing that very few cases kind of make it through that process to being charged.
I want to back up a bit and talk about what's in a rape kit. Can you describe that for us?
Sure. So when someone is sexually assaulted, they have the option of going to a hospital and having a sexual assault exam completed. And this is a truly head-to-toe examination of that victim. A nurse is going to swab various parts of their body to collect evidence, take strands of hair, take scrapings from beneath their fingernails. It can take hours, 4 to 6 hours actually, and many victims say that this process can be just as damaging as the assault itself.
And then what's involved in terms of time and money to gather and process a rape kit?
So testing a rape kit is not cheap. It can cost roughly $1,000 to test a sexual assault kit. But that's only part of what the money is supposed to go to for this program. Places can spend money on testing their kits, but the money through this federal program also goes to training police and prosecutors on how to better investigate and prosecute those cases. And it goes to helping places develop new victim notification protocols so that survivors are treated in a more fair and thoughtful way. What we've seen actually, though, across the country is that some places haven't even spent all of the money that they've been given. So Iowa, for example, I mentioned that they tested less than half of their backlog. They received a $3 million federal grant. And at the end of their initiative, they sent back almost a third of that money unspent. That is money that certainly could have gone to improving processes in Iowa or even just testing more sexual assault kits.
The $350 million used to fund these grants that I mentioned at the top was from the Department of Justice. You reached out to them about your reporting and the shockingly low rate of convictions that resulted from this money. What was their response?
They've said that this program has been instrumental in communities across the country in getting rape kits tested, investigating these cases, and giving closure to survivors. But they have also acknowledged that the results are really going to vary depending on the level of buy-in from local officials who are running this program. They've also said that it's too soon to tell the program's results because it can take years for a case to go from a kit being tested to investigation to potential prosecution. But what we've seen is that even in some of the places that have had these grants for the longest, so the earliest grantees, there have been very few resulting convictions.
Bottom line, do we know if this funding really made a dent in keeping rapists off the streets? Is anyone keeping police departments accountable for the money they've received?
The way that this program is structured, these grantees have a lot of autonomy to develop their own programs, their own testing plans, their own investigative plans. And the federal government provides them with guidelines, but not many requirements. And we've seen that there are these places that have strayed from these best practices, these government recommendations. We found that many sites are not even reporting accurate information to the federal government on how many convictions they've gotten or how many victims they've notified. So federal officials do not have a great sense of whether the program is successful, let alone be able to hold that site accountable if it's not.
I know you looked at cities across the country that received this funding as part of your investigation. Take us behind the scenes in one of them and what happened when they attempted to clear their backlog of kits.
I spent a lot of time reporting in Wichita, Kansas. When the state received a federal grant under this program in 2015 and they tallied the untested rape kits across the state, there were roughly 1,100 in Wichita, which was half of the total in the state. When those kits were tested, a team of law enforcement officials and prosecutors in Wichita sat down and looked at the results, and they were really weighing whether there was any new information here that could lead to the case being reopened, investigated, and potentially prosecuted. And out of all of those kits, they ended up flagging 16 cases where they thought that could happen. At that point, they decided that those were the only cases where they were going to contact the people who had made these reports. Several of them couldn't be found. Several of them said they didn't want their cases reopened, and a few said they did want their cases to be reinvestigated. At this point, 2 suspects have been convicted in Wichita from the backlog of roughly 1,100 kits. We asked the Wichita Police Department if there are any cases where DNA testing has resulted in the identification of a suspect for the first time, cases where people reported being raped by strangers who they did not know. And if there are any cases like that where they have still not contacted the victims. And they said that there are. So I spoke to the executive director of the Wichita Area Sexual Assault Center about this, and she was shocked and honestly horrified at the thought that there are women in her community who might be interacting with the person who raped them. This might be a neighbor or someone who works at their child's school or someone that they go on a date with. And the police might have that person's name, know that that is the suspect in their case, and not have notified the woman because they don't think that they can prosecute the case.
We heard from a couple of women at the beginning of our conversation, and there are thousands of others like them whose assailants have not been brought to justice, and they don't know if they will ever be. Is there a particular story you can share that illustrates the impact funding like this can have for a victim?
So one of the women in Wichita, Kansas, who got a phone call when her kit was tested is a woman named Lisa Nunez Nahara. And this was in 2018. Lisa came home one day and found a business card at her front door. It was from a lieutenant with the sex crimes unit at the Wichita Police Department. She was really overwhelmed, honestly, finding this card. It sent her mind just racing with questions if someone she knew had been hurt, or if if she had done something wrong, or if they were reaching out about one of the several sexual assaults that she's reported to authorities over the course of her life. She settled her nerves and she picked up the phone and she called the lieutenant, and he told her that he wanted to speak with her about a sexual assault that she had reported 12 years earlier. They had just finally tested her sexual assault kit and they had a DNA match. Lisa was really confused. She thought that her kid had been tested years ago, even though there had never been an arrest in her case. So she went in and she met with the police, and she did a photo lineup and flipped the pages and got to that last page and saw the photo of the man who she says raped her. So in that case, at this point, the police have issued a warrant for that man's arrest. He has not been taken into custody. They don't believe that he is in the country at this point. But what's important is Lisa has said that even without that closure, even without seeing her rapist actually, arrested and convicted, she is glad that her sexual assault kit was tested. And she's glad that she is one of those women in Wichita who got a phone call and was told the results. She now has this peace of mind knowing that if this man ever comes back to the United States, that he can be arrested. And she also has his name, which she never did before. Maybe as significantly, though, Lisa has said that going through this has helped her process what happened to her. What she learned is that she was strong enough to face it, and that it was better to talk about these things rather than bury them. And she's said that all of this has given her some of her power back.
Thank you for doing this very important work and for sharing it with us, Tricia.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.